Well, winter is a little bit more than halfway over, so we want to take a look at our outlook and how things are going, biggest stories, and what's going to happen for the rest of the season. So Barry and I are going to kind of duel it out here and take a look at some of the factors. I think the biggest story's got to be, so far, the cold that we saw to end December and start January, superlative.
I like it when the winter is loaded on the front end.
Me too.
As opposed to later on, because I want spring to start in March. What do you think about March this year?
A couple of crocus bulbs. I don't know. March is looking a little bit shaky so far.
Seems like it is every single year.
It is. March is just a slog, but at least it's brighter. We know that daylight saving time will begin. We'll have the equinox and all those beautiful things.
March 11th, 6:46.
Not that we're counting. You know, that cold that we saw in late December and early January, the coldest first week of January on record. When you have a stretch that's as brutally cold as that was, it's going to weigh down almost the entire seasonal average, which is kind of what we're looking at to this point.
Yeah, and so what do we do with the thaws? We're having a little bit of a thaw. We've had certainly some variability, and that's what La Niñas are typical for around here. I just wonder, we usually get a cold winter, and somewhere in the middle of a very cold winter, we have a stretch of very warm weather. Vice versa, in a very warm winter, like we had a couple of winters ago, we got a burst of cold like we had in Valentine's Day weekend when it was 9 below zero in Boston in an extremely warm winter.
Coldest weather we've seen in years and years still.
This year I think it's just the flip, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, you talked a lot about at the beginning of the season, the analogs to busy hurricane seasons in the Atlantic and how things tend to go in the winter. It kind of seems like that really has panned out. Yeah,
that's been some research and study that's been done on that in recent years. So it seems like that is working out this time around. So that's something we'll be watching going forward, I'm sure.
Right, so the big story that we're watching as we kind of have our feet up a little bit in the weather office right now, up through early February, and then that's where things look to change. We've been watching this big pool of severe cold in Siberia. And the way the atmosphere works, it's fluid. That's going to flush out at some point. And it looks like it may head in our direction. We're looking toward the middle of February, really, where that may kick in.
Will it be done by the MJO? The Madden-Julian Oscillation.
Something people, you know, we do these outlooks all the time, but you might have just started to hear about this over the last few years, and it's really come a long way.
I'm still learning a lot more about it, you know, because it's relatively new. It was discovered a couple of decades ago, but I'm still starting to hear more about it.
Now.
So they're starting to figure how it really plays a part in forecasting seasons, especially during the winter. So if you got one of these MJO impulses, like down, and these happen down in the tropics.
So basically when we were talking about this, it's basically tracking where there's a pulse of tropical convection looking out toward the subcontinent. So we're talking around Indonesia and India and how those thunderstorms flare up. And the reason the tropics are so important is because they release a lot of heat into the atmosphere. That can change how the jet stream gets configured, and that can drive weather all across the northern hemisphere, which is why it's so important.
So the different phases of this MJO dictate or the kinds of temperature regimes or anomalies that will develop over in North America. But this is all happening way down in the tropics. So it's fascinating to me that something happening so far away can influence our weather here.
And we've really, in the last couple of years, started to watch this more for the winter. It started kind of as the tropics. The MJO is great at kind of pinpointing when the tropics will become active and where. That includes our hurricane season. But in winter, we've been in this warm phase recently. And now as the MJO goes to phases 8, 1, 2, that shift should allow the jet stream to in turn shift back kind of to what we saw in late December, early January.
So as it moves mainly into the southern Pacific, east of Indonesia, it tends to alter the jet stream farther north. So therefore, if it alters it, pumps up this big ridge in the eastern Pacific, pumps up enough, it'll capture this severe cold in Siberia and dump it over the top, and it comes down into North America.
So that's really the big thing that we'll be watching during the second half of the season. Does that pan out? How severe will it be for us? And, of course, will we get a lot more snow? It always snows in February. That's a lock month. And usually we kind of look around, you know, about the 5th of February through the 3rd week. Climatologically, it almost always delivers. And it looks like a pretty good shot of that.
Yeah, the La Niña's in place. We've got this other thing going on, which is the QBO, which I love so much. Because I find also this fascinating. It's another one of these situations where it's far away from us, but it
miles up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, and it's over the equator, like 10 or 12 miles up over the equator, and the wind blows in from east or west, and it oscillates through a period of about 13 months. Every 13 months it changes. It changes all of a sudden, goes from east and it goes to west, or it flips around. So when it's in the easterly phase, like we're in right now, it tends to enhance or make a colder La Nina, especially when we're in an environment where the solar activity, the solar output is low.
Yeah, we're at basically our solar minimum right now, 11-year cycles of
Right.
sunspots. We're at a very low point at this
Right.
time. So to kind of wrap it up, and what we're watching here is that we do think some big cold and likely some snow chances will return, especially starting maybe end of the first week, second week of February. And March, we might hold on to the cold for a while, at least for the first half of the month. It doesn't look like some of the other years where we've burst into the warm weather, and it looked like maybe we'd have a chance, but I don't know, Bear. Looking a little shaky.
Sorry, we're not going to duke it out this time because we're pretty much in agreement on most of this that we're talking about sort of the beginning. In part one of this, we started this. But for one thing, I'm sure you'll agree with me on this. It's not going to be a blowtorch rest of the winter like 2011, 2012 was. I mean, every single month. Then March went way off the charts or being way above average.
Which was also La Nina, which really shows you when we try to break down all these factors, we try to share them with you and absorb them all. El Nino or La Nina, it's one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and they're not all the same. We've had really warm La Nina winters. We've had really cold ones. This feels a lot like 2010 and 2011.
You have to look at all the pieces of the puzzle. You can't look at just a few. And back then, when we had that very warm spell, one of the things that was happening, the QBO, the wind was going the other way. It was going west to east. So see what a difference that made.
Yeah. So that's where we stand
There we
right
go.
now. And we'll be here for you, storms or not, here as we go through the rest of the season. So far, we're at our seasonal averages for snowfall. It hasn't been above or below, really. And looks like we're going to make up some ground here as we
Want to take a stab at how much we actually end up with?
I'm sticking with my initial guess of around 40 plus or minus 5.
And I went higher with you at the beginning,
Yep.
so we'll still duke it out about that. I'm still going to go higher. I'm still going to go 60 or so.
All right. So
Okay.
make or break in February to early March. Keep it tuned to WBZ. We'll have you covered.
And think snow.